Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on something kind of uncomfortable, maybe for some folks. Pain and pleasure, and how much we're relying on medication these days to deal with, well, just about any discomfort.
Everywhere you look,
Yeah,
yeah.
seriously. And we've got some really, really interesting stuff to dig into. Excerpts from a book that, well, it doesn't pull any punches when it comes to addiction, and a personal anecdote I think you'll find pretty insightful. Oh, and there's this visual metaphor about a seesaw. It's going to stick with you, I guarantee.
A seesaw. I'm intrigued already.
Yeah, you'll see. Okay, so to kick things off, I want to tell you about this young man, Chris. I met him a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He came to me for help with his dependence on buprenorphine.
Ah, yeah.
It's often used to help people get off stronger opioids.
Right. Trying to wean them off.
But it can become a whole other dependence in itself.
Oh, absolutely. It
Yeah.
happens.
So Chris's story, it actually starts way back in 2003. He's this freshman at Stanford, total picture of ambition, super organized, like, classic Stanford overachiever.
I can picture it.
But beneath the surface, things weren't so great.
It's like what the author was saying about addiction being hidden, right?
Right.
Especially in those high-pressure environments people put up a front.
Yeah, you got it. And with Chris, uh, things took a really dark turn during his sophomore year. Relationship fell apart, felt like his whole world was imploding. He actually tried to take his own life.
Oh, wow.
It's heavy stuff. He planned the whole thing out so carefully, even picked out the music he wanted playing. I mean, it just shows you how deep that despair was.
It's a powerful reminder of how fragile we all are and how quickly things can unravel.
Thank goodness his attempt wasn't successful. He got help,
That's good to hear.
but he had to leave Stanford for a while. Eventually, he did go back, and he seemed like really determined to put his life back together. Switched his major to chemistry even.
Chemistry.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It was almost like he was trying to grasp control, like understanding the world through a whole different lens.
Yeah, I get that.
But sadly, he relapsed. Wasn't too long, just a few months, and he was smoking again. Then cannabis, and then, well, harder drugs.
Oh, no.
He started selling his stuff too, like his laptop, even his winter coat, anything to feed the addiction.
Wow.
It's heartbreaking. You can just picture him out there, wandering around in the middle of winter, freezing, alone.
It's like what we were talking about with the addiction cycle, setbacks, relapses. It's rarely straightforward.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
And that pull of addiction, it can overpower even the most basic need to survive. After a few years of trying to get clean, going through different programs, Chris ended up back in my office. This time it was the buprenorphine that was the problem, the very thing that was supposed to be helping him. And that's where this broken balance idea comes in, the one the book talks about with the seesaw.
Right. That seesaw thing. Okay, lay it on me.
So, it's a visual for the balance between pleasure and pain in the brain.
Interesting. Okay, I see where this is going.
So now think about Chris, right? Was he trying to fix some chemical imbalance that he was born with? Or did those opioids actually mess things up more, like hijack his reward system?
That's a huge question, isn't it? It gets at the heart of how we think about addiction. Are we putting things back in order, or are we throwing things even more out of whack?
Exactly. And that's not just for Chris. That question, that affects all of us.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Like, are we way too quick to jump to medication? As a quick fix for stuff that's actually really complicated? Maybe we're just covering up the problem instead of really dealing with it.
Yeah, I mean, the book brings up some pretty worrying stuff about relying so much on medication. Especially, the ones that affect your mind. Like, for example, there's this story about a college student, David, got hooked on prescription stimulants.
Oh, wow.
It's a good reminder that, dependence, it can happen even when you're taking something your doctor gave you.
It's like we think there's a pill for everything, right? We want the quick and easy solution. We forget about therapy, lifestyle changes, all that stuff that can actually make a real difference.
It's like we're trying to, engineer away all the bad feelings, right? And the book, it even says there's not really a lot of proof that some of these common medications, like antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs, that they even really work long term.
And then you start looking at who's getting prescribed these medications and how often. It gets kind of scary.
It's messed up. Like, the book points out that poor kids, they're way more likely to be given meds for, emotional and behavioral problems. It's not right.
Are we really helping them, or are we just trying to control them? It's a big ethical question.
And it's not just kids either. There's a strong connection between, like, poverty, unemployment, and opioid prescriptions.
Yeah, it's like we're just trying to numb the pain of these bigger problems instead of actually fixing them. Like going back to that seesaw image, we're just piling more weight on the pleasure side to try and force it level.
Yeah. And what happens in the long run when we do that, the book argues that, all this medication, it could actually make us less able to feel the full range of human emotions,
Yeah.
the good and the bad.
It's like if you try to eliminate all the negative, you end up losing some of the positive too, right?
Totally. And this brings us to your own experience. You mentioned taking Prozac before, right? Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. I took it for anxiety when I was in my early 20s. At first, it did help. I felt less anxious. My mood was better. But after a while, it was like my emotions were, I don't know, kind of flat, not as much joy, not as much sadness, just less of everything.
So it was like it dulled the bad stuff, but it also dulled the good stuff too.
Exactly. What was really interesting was how it affected my relationship with my mother. We've always had our issues. And when I was on Prozac, I noticed I just didn't care as much about those conflicts. It wasn't that the problems went away, it's just that I didn't react to them as strongly.
Hmm. That's fascinating. So do you regret taking it?
It's hard to say. I mean, it helped me through a tough time, but it's complicated. I think it's important to know what the risks are,
Yeah.
and to remember that medication, it's not always the answer.
Yeah, it sounds like you ended up finding a better way to deal with those difficult feelings rather than just relying on medication. And that actually connects with something the author talks
Yeah.
about an alternative to just trying to get rid of pain. It's about embracing it.
Yeah, and I think that's important to clarify. He's not saying medication is bad. It can be really helpful. Sometimes it's crucial. But the point is, we got to be careful about relying on it too much, and we need to be open to other ways of dealing with pain.
Okay, I want to switch gears a little and go back to some of those bigger societal things we were talking about. The book gives some pretty shocking stats about how over-medication affects certain groups more than others.
It's pretty alarming when you see the numbers. Like, did you know that poor people are way more likely to be prescribed psychiatric drugs? And not just that, they're given higher doses too?
Yeah, and the CDC data, it really backs that up.
Right.
I mean, get this, 7.5% of American kids, 6 to 17 years old, they're on medication for emotional and behavioral difficulties.
And you see those prescriptions way more often for poor kids than for richer kids. And if you look even closer, it's mostly boys, especially white boys.
It makes you wonder, like, is this really about their health? Or is there something else going on? Are there biases at play?
It's a good question to ask. And this trend, it's not just with kids either. The book, it talks about research showing that toddlers on Medicaid, they're 10 times more likely to be prescribed psychotropic meds compared to other toddlers. 10 times! It's crazy. Makes you worry about what's going to happen to these kids down the road.
It's heavy stuff. The author even says that giving all these medications to these kids, it could actually be considered a form of inhumane treatment, especially when they're using it to control behavior instead of actually treating a medical problem.
Yeah, we got to be really careful about medicating kids, especially those who don't have a lot of other support.
It's like we need a whole different way of thinking about mental and emotional health, one that looks at everything, not just pills, their social life, their economic situation, all of it.
We need to remember that medication, it's just one piece of the puzzle. There's therapy, mindfulness, community support groups. All these things can help people learn to cope, to be more resilient, and to really address what's causing their problems.
It's about, figuring out what works for each person, not just giving everyone the same thing. And this brings us back to that link between unemployment and opioids, which is, well, pretty disturbing too.
It's a trap. People lose their jobs, their mental health goes downhill, they get prescribed opioids, and it just keeps going. We're using medication to hide the symptoms of a broken system instead of actually fixing the system.
It really makes you question who's benefiting from all this, right?
Yeah.
Are we actually helping people or are we just keeping them dependent? Tough question, but we can't ignore it.
It forces us to really think about the role of medication in our society and to fight for a better, more humane approach to healthcare. We have to ask those hard questions about the systems we've created and what happens when we just keep reaching for quick fixes.
It's not enough to just look at individuals. We have to understand how everything else is connected to these problems.
Exactly. And the author makes another point about how this reliance on medication might be changing our relationship with pain on a cultural level. He compares it to this sci-fi movie Serenity, where...
Hold on, didn't we talk about Serenity before?
Oh, right, my bad. got a little carried away there. I guess I'm just really into this topic. What I meant to say was,
Yeah, yeah, no worries. It happens. But you're right, that serenity thing, it fits in really well with what we're talking about.
yeah.
So in the movie, they get rid of pain in this future society
Hmm.
through genetic engineering. But they end up losing their humanity in the process. And the author, he uses that to show what could happen to us. With all this medication, trying to numb everything.
Yeah, it makes you think, like, are we losing something important by trying to get rid of all the bad feelings?
Right. Like, what happens if we never experience any kind of suffering? What's the cost of that?
The author's point is that pain, it's not fun, obviously, but it actually has a purpose. It tells us when something's wrong, it helps us grow, it even helps us connect with other people.
So if we just try to wipe out all the pain, we could end up, I don't know, disconnected, not really feeling anything,
Yeah.
and in the end, weaker.
Yeah, not just weaker for ourselves, but it affects our ability to empathize with others, too. If we don't feel pain, how can we really understand what other people are going through?
That's a really deep thought, and it kind of brings us back to the core of what we're talking about today. We're not saying that medication is, like, bad. It can be super important, even save lives.
Yeah.
But we have to be aware of the downsides, and we have to be open to different ways of dealing with pain.
And just to be clear, the author gets that medication is a big part of, treating people. But his main point is there's a trade-off. When we try to erase every kind of pain, we lose something. And there's a different way, maybe a better way. It's about embracing the pain.
That's a big idea. It means, like, changing how we think about discomfort, not as something awful to avoid all the time, but as something that can teach us and make us stronger and, yeah, more human.
Embracing pain doesn't mean like going out and looking for it or saying it's a good thing. It's more about accepting it, understanding that it's part of life and that we can learn from it.
So it's about, like, finding that sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
Between getting relief when you need it and letting yourself feel all the feels.
Exactly. And that's going to be different for everyone. What matters is that we're talking about it, that we're thinking about how we deal with pain, both for ourselves and as a society.
So to wrap things up today, we'll leave you with this. How can you, in your own life, embrace discomfort? Use it to grow and change.
Think about it. What can you learn from the tough stuff? How can it make you stronger? How can it connect you with others? It's a challenge, but it's worth it. It's about being open to the whole human experience, the good and the bad.
That's a great place to leave it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time. Stay curious out there.